Seb Gary and Henry Cromie bring to you the slave trade in documentary.
In this documentary, we'll cover all the key information about the slave trade.
We will talk about the slave trade triangle, life on the plantations, and much, much more. The slave trade was operated in a simple triangle, the three stops being
Europe to West Africa to Central and Northern America, then the boats went back to Europe.
We will now explain the three stops in more detail. The journey from Europe to West Africa contained manufactured and other goods, such as trinkets, tools and arms, which were traded for slaves in Western Africa. The slaves were not always traded, they were sometimes captured from villages, but when they were traded, they were usually prisoners of war.
The journey from Western Africa to the Americas was called the Middle Passage. This was known to be the cruelest journey, as all the slaves were on the ship. Olaudah Equiano, who was a freed slave, said in his biography, "The stench of the hold, the heat and the crowding, which meant that each had scarcely room to turn, almost suffocated us. There was a sickness among the slaves of which many died. The situation was aggravated by the rubbing of the chains and the filth of the lavatory buckets, into which many children often fell. I became so sick that as I was a young boy, my chains were removed and I was allowed to stay on deck. One day, two of my wearied countrymen, who were chained together, preferring death to such a life of misery, jumped into the sea. This is likely to be a reliable source and is very cruel. The slaves are then sold in slave auction in the Americas."
The final leg of the slave triangle was from the Americas back to Europe. This ship contained raw materials such as sugar, rum, cotton, and tobacco.
Slaves were used for many things. However, what an owner of a slave asks his slave to do is purely down to him.
After slaves were bought at an auction, they are then the property of their owner. So they can be used to do things like making food, cleaning, working on the plantations, etc., etc. Basically, whatever the owner wants his or her slave to do happens, and if they refuse, they will most likely be punished.
Life on a plantation was grueling work, working in fields, washing and cooking all day long. It was extremely tiring work, and they didn't even get fed properly. In fact, they got fed just enough food to keep them alive, but not enough so they have the energy to rebel.
In fact, they were so badly treated, many slaves died. They didn't have beds and slept on the cold, wet, damp floor, so were never well rested, and to make things worse, if they weren't working hard enough, they would be severely punished. Punishment can be very brutal, even if a slave did the slightest thing wrong.
There are many types of punishment carried out by captains, plantation owners, and most white people involved in the slave trade.
Here are some examples.
This is a collar with heavy steel bars, which makes it uncomfortable for you to do anything: walking, sleeping, sitting down.
This whip is specially customed to put people in pain.
This is also an uncomfortable collar, but not so heavy, however it still has the same effect.
This is just a brutal beating using a wooden bat.
They punish for few reasons. Firstly, to keep them scared and show who's in charge, and secondly, for them to know that there will be punishment if anything is tried. The most common type of resistance was day-to-day resistance. This is where you do sneaky, sly things such as breaking tools, faking illness, working slowly and committing acts of sabotage. These are all forms of resistance.
Running away was another form of resistance. They tended to run away short distances as they were not planning to escape permanently. They were just temporarily withholding their labour as a form of negotiation. The negotiation is slaves bargaining over the pace of their work, how much free time they get, and marriages, etc., etc.
But a vast majority of the resistance was people trying to permanently escape. These people were following the Underground Railroad, which is lots of steps, which include following the stars, going north, and looking out for people trying to help them so they can stay during the day as they travelled by night. The slaves who tried to escape make their way towards Canada, as it is free from slavery, and slaves are then free when they
The Underground Railroad was a vast network of mostly white people trying to help the slaves escape to Canada. It was not run by one individual person, but many people. The local people were severely outnumbered by people working with the slave trade, but they still managed to help hundreds of slaves escape every year. One estimate that said that the South lost 100,000 slaves from 1810 to 1850.
The system to help the runaway slaves was said to be started in the late 1700s. The system grew and grew and grew, and then it was nicknamed the Underground Railroad. It was named this as a code name due to the up-and-coming steam railroads. Escaping to Canada was anything but easy for a slave.
The first stage of running away was escaping from the plantation. This required a slave to get away him or herself. This would sometimes have someone directing them north, but usually they would have to follow the stars. There is a song called Follow the Drinking Gourd. The drinking gourd is a star arrangement. At the tip of the drinking gourd is the North Star. If you keep following this star, you will get to Canada.
As the slaves travelled by night, they needed somewhere to stay during the day. There were people in villages trying to help the slaves. One way of helping them was letting them stay in your house during the day. A slave would know if a person was helping them because they would have patterned blankets outside their houses. These patterns, with geese flying north on them, the North Star, and many others. Though as there was a high reward if you found an escaped slave, some people put out these blankets and turned the slave in.
People like Pegfoot Joe helped the slaves through the Underground Railroad. It was Pegfoot Joe who wrote the song Follow the Drinking Gourd. Also, Harriet Tubman, who went to America and guided over 300 slaves to escape to Canada.
Slavery in England was abolished in 1834 and abolished in the USA in 1863.
The end of slavery was a great day for many people. However, slavery had taken its toll on lots of slaves, and when it was abolished, slavery had claimed over 3 million lives.
Slavery was a hard thing to get rid of, but there were a few people committed to get it abolished, including Olaudah Equiano, Thomas Clarkson, and William Wilberforce.
Olaudah Equiano was a slave who bought his freedom, and then he wrote a biography about his life to inform people about the atrocities that are going on. This book played a big part as it turned many English and American citizens against slavery.
Thomas Clarkson also played a big part. He set up the Society of Effecting the Abolishment of Slavery, which is a society to stop slavery. The society was able to persuade William Wilberforce, an MP for Hull, speak out for them in Parliament. Wilberforce was then able to set up a parliamentary investigation into the slave trade. Thomas collected a lot of evidence from people involved in the slave trade, and then he wrote an essay which many people read. The information that he gathered helped a lot in the investigation.
The abolishment was finally passed in 1833, but didn't take full effect until 1834. Thank you for listening, and we hope you have enjoyed our documentary.